Hi, everybody. Welcome to Looking for Legends. We're a live video cast that speaks with people from all walks of the publishing world. My co-host, Christy Stratos, who can't be here tonight, David M. Kelly, and myself encourage viewers to chime in with questions for our guests or simply comment on what you hear. Tonight, we're excited to welcome science fiction, techno-thriller, and popular science author Edward M. Lerner. Welcome, Edward.
Hi, Rich. Thanks for having me. Hi, David.
We're happy to have you on there.
Hi, Edward. Sorry.
Dave muted himself. So there's a lot of times we try to mute Dave and we can't. But before we get started, Edward, why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about you, just in case they're not familiar with you and your works?
Okay. I started out as a physicist. As I was working my way through a physics degree, I took my first computer course and never looked back. I worked in high-tech and aerospace for 30 years, and for the last several of those years, I wrote science fiction as my hobby. After my second novel sold, which meant the first one wasn't a fluke, I decided I was ready for a second career, and I've been writing full-time ever since. And I'm up to 22 books, with number 23 due out later this month, so I guess it took.
That's awesome. 22 books. Wow. I've got a few books to catch up.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
I've only got 7 so far.
I welcome the race.
How many you got, Dave?
7.
7? Oh, I thought you had more than that. Is that including your anthologies and stuff?
That's not including the collection of short stories.
Yeah. You're cutting yourself short.
I'm including collections, so it's only 16 novels.
So, Edward, I want to ask you that. Imagine working in high-tech and aerospace field for like 30 years. It's obviously influenced what you write. I was curious as I was reading that that during your work as an engineer and then as a supervisor afterwards, is there something that you foresaw way back when being invented and before it actually came into being? Like, this is something I think science fiction writers often envision, and then all of a sudden we're reading their stuff years later and wow, he predicted it.
Well, I won't claim that I predicted anything profound. I think I'm more of the extrapolation mode than the inventing something from the whole cloth mode. So seeing where computer science might go 5, 10, 20 years out, for example, that's the kind of thing that comes naturally. But I won't claim that I invented the internet or anything like that.
No, you didn't predict a cell phone, or I guess that phones were kind of in the background for many, many years before they actually came mainstream. But
I was working at Bell Labs when the first practical cell phones were being developed. They were big, clunky, ugly things, and because they were very inefficient in their use of frequency, there were only a few thousand allowed in a major metropolitan area because they just interfered with each other. Otherwise, it was quite different than the cell phones we know today.
Yeah, and it's funny that all the misinformation and stuff when they first started coming out, because I remember driving with my grandmother when they first came out, and she was so concerned that we were on the cell phone that was going to bring the airplanes down because we were driving by Toronto International Airport, and she thought it was going to interfere with whatever was going on in the cockpit. And I wasn't sure, so I had to shut my phone off.
And I remember my first cell phone. Do you remember what was called a bag phone?
Well, you know what? One of our viewers just said that. I remember using a huge bag phone in my car.
I see that comment. That's what I had. And about the only time I used it was when traffic was so awful. I knew I was going to be, really late getting home, and I'd call from the car and tell my wife, expect me when you see me. This was before cell phones were close to fitting inside pockets.
Yes, I remember they looked like those great big army ones that you see on the back of a soldier's back, and the sergeant or captain would pick it off the back of him and start talking. So
not quite that bad, but certainly bulky.
And here's are quite expensive too, $1 a minute. Holy smokes, that's almost like gas now.
Yeah, well, The good
So-
news about writing for a living is my daily commute takes about 10 seconds. It's, from the dinette to my den.
Yeah, no, I hear you. The only thing that slows
Yeah.
me down is if we have a jackknife cat in the way.
When I switched to full-time writing, I was communicating with my brother who was still commuting across much of metropolitan Chicago. And I told him I had a construction delay getting to work. See, my wife was touching up a spackle spot on the ceiling, and I had to detour around a stepladder in the family room.
Yeah,
He
those
was
are
not
awful.
remotely amused.
Yeah, and if they don't show up in your GPS, it could mean a long trip to the coffee machine. That's for sure.
Hmm.
So,
But the good news is I did get to my den, and I did a lot of writing meanwhile, and have stuff to show for it.
That's awesome. Just before we get on with this, I have to put this comment in here as well. So anyone who's not sure who David M. Kelly is, actually, it is still the same David M. Kelly that's been here before. There's just something different about him today. I'm not quite sure what it is.
Yeah, don't know. Maybe I got a smudge on my face or something.
So what I want to ask too is when we introduced you as a techno thriller writer, and I'm a fantasy writer, so that's all I do. And I'm not, there's so many different genres out there. What is techno thriller other than what it implies?
Well, it's a genre that butts up against science fiction. Both science fiction and techno thrillers require that the plot be seriously dependent in one way or another on some kind of science or technology. I think what distinguishes techno thrillers is, first of all, they tend to be near future, on or very near Earth, and they extrapolate the consequences of a single technological development. I think the classical example of that would be Jurassic Park. So Michael Crichton looked at what happens if we could bring back the dinosaurs, and he did some hand-wavium about genetic engineering, but nothing in the book or the movie thought about what are all the other things that same genetic engineering advance would enable. It was just narrowly focused on that one consequence.
Right.
Now, don't take from that disapproval. I loved Jurassic Park, the book and the movie. Okay, so when I've done techno thrillers, as an example, I looked at what happens if we could create medical nanobots. And of course, in any novel, you need to have something go horribly, horribly wrong. And so my medical nanobots that were supposed to be purged from the body soon after doing their medical chores weren't under certain circumstances. And of course, interesting events ensued. I did another techno thriller whose focus was, what if we could breed an artificial intelligence? It wasn't the kind of artificial intelligence that used to be the focus of fiction back then, where we assumed people would program it and the AI would have definite known rules and we would always understand how it worked. No, I came up with the kind of AI that was developed by evolutionary means, call it an artificial life, and there was no way to know what was going on inside of it, and it didn't necessarily behave the way we would like it to, and of course, unfortunate events ensued. Maybe that's the summary of a novel. It's a long book in which unfortunate events ensue.
That's how Skynet came about, was it not?
You could say that, yes.
Edward, you started off as a physicist and then you switched to IT, which is kind of curiously quite similar to my own path, actually. And then you switched to writing. And I was just wondering, when you actually kind of like switched to full-time writing, like before then, were you actually writing a long time before you made the switch, or was it kind of like fairly much sort of like at the same time?
It had been a while. I started on my first writing project something like 17, 18 years before I became a full-time author. But that's misleading because shortly after my first novel came out, which was only a few years after I started, I took a job with Hughes Aircraft as a NASA contractor. And it was a 6-day-a-week job on easy weeks. And I accumulated all sorts of wonderful information that I could use in my writing and had absolutely no time in which to write. It wasn't until quite a while later that I actually had time to ooze back into writing again. In the year 2000, I hit a milestone birthday and gave myself a sabbatical as a gift. And I sold a whole bunch of stories to Analog and Artemis magazines and got a good start on a novel. And I would have switched to full-time writing then, but the stupid internet bubble burst. And that complicated life a little bit. So I had to wait a few more years.
That's interesting. Like my first novel took me 13 years to write because I was at the same time I was working as a project manager, IT project manager. See, get my teeth working today. And like the job was so stressful, I just couldn't actually find time to write. You know, I was just kind of like, I didn't want to look at a screen after I finished work.
I get that. Now, I will mention, since I talked about this ridiculously long, almost geological period of time, my first novel took me about 3 years to write and 2 more years to sell. The big hiatus came after that. The ironic thing was that novel has main characters who worked for NASA and lived in Washington, D.C., some of them. And when I started the book, I was not working for NASA and I was living in Chicago. But by the time the book came out, I was a NASA contractor living in a DC suburb. Funny how that worked out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So you've written 5 novels as collaborations with Larry Niven. How did that come about?
He and I were on a panel together at a Worldcon in 2004. The panel,
it's just a coincidence that you guys just happened to be there together.
Yeah, we had met at an earlier con, but never interacted much.
Right.
The panel's topic was my favorite planet. And everyone on the panel was asked to talk about what world, real or imaginary, would we most like to visit. When my turn came up, I said to Larry that I really would like to know more about the Fleet of Worlds, which is about 1 chapter glimpsed in Ringworld. And for people unfamiliar with the Ringworld or Fleet of Worlds, the Fleet of Worlds is what it sounds like. It's a constellation of planets untethered from a star flying through space. And of course, they're populated by interesting aliens. Larry's answer to this was, well, I don't have a plot idea for that. Shortly after the convention, I got back in touch with him and I said, well, I do. And that led to the first book. And that did well enough that there was a second book and a third. And we stopped at 5. I'm of the theory that series must die. They get tired if you don't do that. So I'm very happy with how we wrapped up with number 5. And it was a good experience.
So how does the collaboration work? Like, do you write a chapter, he writes a chapter, or how does that work between you two?
Okay. Not like that. Okay. Larry describes collaborating with me as a spectator sport, which is very generous. He has developed a hugely extensive future history and imagined universe that he calls known space, which covers hundreds of years and tens of light years and a dozen or so interesting alien species and a lot of interesting characters. And I got to recycle recycle gives it the wrong connotation. I got to extend that universe. The outline was mine. Only once in the course of 5 books did he ask me to make a semi-significant plot change because he thought I was going to have one of his species act contrary to his opinion of how they would act. I would do a first draft. I'd send it off to him. He would edit. Then I would edit his edits, and it went back and forth from there until we were both happy. And it actually went pretty smoothly. We had a lot of email exchanges, a few telephone calls. We only met in person a literal handful of times when we were both at the same convention because we live on opposite coasts.
That's interesting. So do you find it was quicker to write a novel that way? Do you find it took the same amount of time, or did it take longer because you had to wait for each other?
It was probably a little bit longer because had to add time for the feedback cycles.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't significantly longer, but yeah, there was a noticeable difference.
Yeah. And our viewer there says, amazing to hear you collaborated with Larry Niven. That's awesome.
It was fun.
Ed, if I could ask a question now. So you've got a blog entitled Thoughts and Occasionally Fuming about the state of science fiction and science fiction. So I've got to ask you, how do you feel about some of the recent adaptations of sci-fi classics that we've seen, such as Dune and Foundation?
Okay, I have seen them both. Foundation is very loosely adapted from the novel. I actually like the David Lynch version from a few decades ago. Oh, sorry, I'm conflating. I was talking about Foundation, not Dune. Scratch that. Okay. The best thing about Foundation, the recent miniseries, was the cinematography, which was spectacular. I will continue watching it simply for the cinematography. My chief disappointment with the Foundation miniseries is it does violence to the whole concept of psychohistory, which is the point of the novel. Instead of a sociological science that is able to predict things, seemingly Harry Seldon could predict when a particular lost starship would be discovered and would arrive just in the nick of time to save the day. That is not what psychohistory was going to do. Psychohistory was about broad social trends and broad economic trends. So good features and bad features. As for the recent Dune movie, I enjoyed it. I don't believe it would have been intelligible to the average viewer who had not read the book. I thought the same about the David Lynch version decades ago, which I also liked. Just seeing the CGI that produced the sandworm in the new version was spectacular. I'm kind of hoping that these big budget movies will entice some science fiction viewers to become science fiction readers.
Mm-hmm.
I also hope that means they'll try some newer authors. I think in the case of Foundation, the book came out in the early 50s and it was the early 2020s before it was first in video format. And a lot has happened in the genre in the intervening 70 years.
Yeah, an awful lot.
So I also reading your blog, and I saw there's some very exciting news for you. I read the May 6th blog. You've officially become a trading card.
I have.
Along with notable authors such as Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Robert Heinlein, and some other hack that we were talking about, Isaac Asimov. Who the heck is that Asimov guy anyway?
Yeah.
But anyway, joking aside, that's a pretty select company, so congratulations.
Well, thank you. It's kind of fun. I noticed recently that my friend and colleague, Dave Brin, has trading card number 42, which is a seriously great number, but I don't know why it wasn't reserved for Douglas Adams.
Yes, very true.
So how are the numbers graded? Is this is number one Isaac Asimov? Is that how that works?
I think number one is either Jules Verne or H.G. Wells.
H2, okay, all right. But so those would be like the top 4 or 5 in there. That's neat. But that's still a pretty auspicious company, even when you're at 360. And you mentioned something about coming full circle there.
Well, yes, I for whatever geeky reason, am amused by the number 360 and full circle. And I think I mentioned in the blog that maybe it's because I'm, partially Babylonian way back, and 360 degrees in the circle and, 60 minutes in an hour. Those sexadecimal things go back to the Babylonians.
That's awesome. That's pretty cool being part of a playing card thing. That's for sure.
So, Edward, your last novel was Déjà Doomed, which came out a year ago. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you twisted my arm. Okay, Déjà Doomed is a near-future space adventure set mostly but not exclusively on the moon. In the near future, there are American, Russian, and Chinese bases on the moon, plus an international base at the South Pole where ice can be mined. And there are people who are robotically exploring the moon with rented robots. Instead of chasing asteroid wealth, you can find asteroids that bury themselves on the moon's surface. And in the prologue, someone is doing just that, and he follows traces of a precious metal and stumbles across the corpse of an alien body in a spacesuit, and lets the intelligence community know because he's ex-military. So, of course, there's a rush for the Americans on the moon to go explore and see if they can recover some technology. And the Russians know the Americans are up to something, and they want to see what the Americans are up to, and the Chinese are interested. You know how in a horror movie, there's something funny about the house, and you think, why in the world would anyone go in there? Something horrible is going to happen. Well, it works pretty much the same way when you uncover an ancient alien base on the moon. There's going to be advanced technology in there that you're not going to understand, and unfortunate events are going to ensue, if I can quote someone. And so our heroes and our villains are faced with horrible existential challenges if they're going to survive, and the stakes keep getting higher and higher. And I think you would suspect as much, even if the word doomed wasn't in the title. I think it was great fun, and hopefully readers do too.
I like
that. Sounds terrific.
Yeah. So we got a question here. So when you write, what helps to motivate you and keep you focused?
I wish I could say I was focused more often than I am.
I hear you.
I keep covers of previously published books on the wall in my office. My camera's pointed the wrong way to see them right now, but it's sort of like the wall behind Rich. And it's motivational for me to look at covers of books I finished and say, see, you finished that one, you can finish this one too. That's more of an issue at the start of a project. In every writing project, there comes a point where all the preparation, all the research, all the character development comes together, and it's off to a gallop. And then it's hard to stop, and it's hard to take time off for anything. And actually, I'm at that point in the current novel in progress, which is set on Mars, early exploration and possibly colonization. The working title for that is Mars, Life and Death.
That's awesome. I was going to ask you what your latest book that you're working on is. So, do you want to tell us a little bit more about that book, or is that, do you want to keep that under wraps?
I'll tell you about a different book which I recently delivered to the publisher and is going into the editing stage, so our viewers will be able to find it sooner.
Perfect.
And that's called On the Shoals of Space-Time. Okay. Imagine the interstellar equivalent of a cruise liner. And between stars, it suffers a near catastrophe that kills most of the crew and most of the passengers. All they can do, just barely, is limp to a nearby solar system. And that happens to be ours. And they limp to a basically a little emergency shelter. Their only hope for survival is contacting these primitive humans and asking for help, not even sure if their ship could get all the way to Earth, knowing Earth doesn't have the technology to get to them. So it's a first contact novel, but it's quite different than I think any other first contact novel you've ever seen.
A reverse first contact novel.
Yeah, well, lots of first contact novels go in the aliens find us or the us find them version, but usually they're looking to find someone. It's less frequent to have it be an accident.
That sounds really cool.
I like to think so.
Well,
is this a series?
Sorry?
Is this going to be a series, or?
This one is a standalone, I think. The Mars book, the publisher and I are hoping will turn into a series, but of course that's up to readers and shoppers everywhere.
So that's interesting you say that. I'm totally independently published, so I just write what I want to write when I want to write. So you, as far as the series go, like, do you have these stories in mind that you can expand upon this and you'd like to, but you're kind of at the whim of your publisher, so to speak? Not to say that you couldn't write it in the background anyway, but is that something that would dictate whether you continue on with the series?
It is something that affects it. I mean, there are exceptions. I have a 3-book series called InterstellarNet, where I never intended it to be a series, but I was just so invested in the scenario that I went on, and I did eventually sell volumes 2 and 3. So that worked out fine, but I'd much rather not invest in my time in a sequel unless it has a natural audience. And a preceding book that has done well is the demonstration of a natural audience.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting. The different ways that us authors will view whether we want to carry our characters forward or whether we want to start off on a new path.
Yeah. Even when something is in a series, though, it's always my goal to make the books reasonably standalone.
Right.
If you read them all and read them in order, it should be a richer experience, but you should be able to pick them up, individually if that's how you encounter them. Not all series work like that.
No, mine don't.
Yeah, I tried to do that as well.
Yeah, for anyone who is familiar with Lord of the Rings, picking up the 2 towers first is just a bad choice.
Yeah, that seems to be the case with fantasy for sure, because there's so much that leads into book 2 that you'd kind of be lost just jumping into book 2, because book 2 is just going to pick up where book 1 left off.
Yeah, I believe I read somewhere that Tolkien wanted the trilogy to be published all as one book, and the publishing house said, absolutely no way, it's just too long.
Yep.
You know, even individually, each volume is a doorstop. Just imagine what the three of them together would be.
Yeah, no, it would be hard to keep that book together. One of my favorite books is Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard, and we read that, and the spine is so thick that this is pulp paperback, and every time we read it, we have to buy a new book because we just destroyed the book and the pages fall out, and so yeah.
That is a plus of ebooks; they don't fall apart.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Unfortunately, I'll never wrap my head around reading ebooks. I spend too much time on the computer writing my books. I do not enjoy reading ebooks. I have to have the physical book in my hand. So,
well, I do a lot of my recreational reading at night in bed, and it's much more sociable to be reading an ebook with the lights out.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no. If I was to do that, I can't read at night. I'm too. I'll fall asleep within 5 minutes. So, I do my reading in the morning.
So, Edward, you mentioned you've got 17 novels?
Well, 16 published, 17. Number 17 is in work with the publisher, the editing stage. And number 18 is about 3/4 or a little more to a first draft.
Okay. So if you were kind of like recommending one for like a novice sci-fi reader, just starting out, wanting to get into the genre, which would you suggest to them?
Man, that's every author's least favorite question. It's like asking a parent, which is your favorite child?
I was just going to say that. I had someone ask me that the other day, what's your favorite book? And I'm going,
Yeah. Now, I will grant you that the gestation period for children in books is about the same. And this question usually leaves me tongue-tied, but nowadays I have an answer. Coming out in a couple of weeks, May 23rd, is a collection called The Best of Edward M. Lerner. It is 14 separate stories, and each is standalone, but a lot of them have history, such as having developed into a novel or even into a series of novels. These are stories that have won awards, been nominated by awards, have generated a lot of reader interest, and I am very comfortable in saying they're the best of my work. So that's my answer to your question, David, for anyone who wants to tiptoe into the writing of Edward M. Lerner, what the publisher calls the gateway. I don't know if he's thinking of drugs or Fred Pohl.
as long as it's addictive, yeah.
Yes. It's The Best of Edward M. Lerner. It's available for pre-order now, and it'll be delivered to your Kindle or bookstore or mailbox starting May 23rd.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Sorry, just before I do want to ask you a question here, Dave. Again, CJ Davidson saying your knowledge and passion for writing in such a complex genre shines through. Congratulations on your success.
Well, thank you very much, CJ. I appreciate that.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, you can see it that you really enjoy what you do.
I do. My wife says I'm a lot happier than when I had a day job.
Yeah,
My wife says the same thing.
Yeah.
So you did a really interesting blog post about elevator pitches. And how you summarize each novel, which I actually I read, and I found it very helpful myself, because it's very difficult when someone says, "What's your book about?" to actually have even a clue as to where to start to answer that. Because I mean, it's maybe 100,000 words or so, maybe more. But I mean, like, how do you sum that up in like 10 words?
Yep, it's interesting because I look at them dumbly, and I like I don't even know what book they're talking about. Like, I have no idea what the book's about. When I look at them, like, I just spent 6 to 9 months writing this thing. I should know it intimately. When they ask that question, I'm just dumbstruck.
It's very hard. Okay, for people in the audience who haven't heard the term, the elevator pitch or elevator speech is a term pitched in business school if you have a business idea and you find yourself on an elevator with a venture capitalist, and you have, the ride to his next floor where he's getting off to pitch your idea, how do you distill it down to a few words to make the pitch? And the same idea goes along with writing. When you're approaching an editor or a publisher, you can't give them a 5,000 word proposal when you bumped into them at the bar at a convention. You need something much more succinct. To both Rich and David's point that it's really hard to do that, I can only agree. I can spend days and days and days trying to write draft back cover copy for a book, which is limited to 200 words or so. Mm-hmm. Those are very hard words to write, and every word is precious. Death to adverbs. For the true elevator speech, where you're really trying to boil something down to a couple of sentences, is there a secret to it? I don't know that there is, beyond keep trying.
No, that's good. Yeah,
struck you speechless there.
No, it is. It's incredibly difficult. I struggle with this with every book I write. It's like from the, like you said, the back copy to some kind of very succinct description of the book. It's kind of like, how the hell do you do this? It's just so hard.
The one trick of the trade, or at least I think it's a trick, maybe I'm tricking myself, is to think of it in terms of movie taglines. I tried to come up with a tagline for each book. So, there was a very memorable one for Alien: In Space, No One Can Hear You Scream. If you knew nothing more about that movie, that's enough to make you want to see it, right? Mm-hmm. So I try to come up with a tagline for each book and then expand from there.
Yeah, do you include that on your cover?
Often, yes. So I mentioned a techno thriller. I didn't name it. It's called Fool's Experiments. And the tagline for that is, "We are not alone, and it's our own damned fault." I like to think that's a good line.
Yes, yes.
The phrase "Fool's Experiment," by the way, comes from Charles Darwin. Quite aside from looking at finches on the Galapagos Islands, he did an incredibly large amount of biological experimentation, and somehow that's less well known. And so there's a quote from some of his correspondence. "I love fool's experiments. I am always making them." And that just fits perfectly for the experimenters in my novel who were creating this artificial intelligence and not always thinking clearly enough about the consequences of what survival of the fittest meant to this entity they were evolving.
So along with the science fiction and so on, I noticed you've written the Sherlock Chronicles, and also your novel The Company Man was described as Dashiell Hammett meets Andy Weir. So is there a kind of a love there for classic detective fiction? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I like noir detective stories. I love Sherlock Holmes stories. My Sherlock in the Sherlock Chronicles is not anyone you might think. It's not previously unrevealed cases of Sherlock Holmes at 221B Baker Street. It's a bored artificial intelligence about 100 years in the future. And boredom is the biggest risk for AIs. When you think a billion times faster than meat mines, boredom is deadly. So he is diverting himself, solving interesting cases. And he thinks, what can the danger be? What can the hazard be? And actually, it turns out there are some unforeseen complications that ensue. Some of the cases are existential for the AI, not just for his human clients. The company man is a different sort of beast. That involves a forensic accountant whose job is to travel from asteroid to asteroid and try to keep the asteroid miners who are collecting precious metals from being able to steal too much. In between asteroids, his ship is basically hijacked by the company and sent to an asteroid where there is where a bomb has been found, and no one knows why or who placed it there or how to disarm it. And he's the only hope for solving the problem. That's sort of his first case, and then the cases cascade because they need to track down who is behind this, what do they want. Bodies are dropping as is required in any noir mystery. So it's a crossover novel between detectives and near-future space exploration with a dollop of AI.
It's interesting, the Sherlock Chronicles, because, of course, Robert Heinlein had Mycroft Holmes, which was an AI in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress.
Oh, yes, an excellent book. And actually, there is a Mycroft Holmes in my Sherlock Chronicles.
Oh, okay, good.
And as it happens, a Cleopatra and a few other interesting characters.
That's awesome. I see. Sorry, I don't know if you hear something beeping on my computer here, but I see that we're pretty well at the end of our show here. So I want to thank you for being on here and telling us a little bit about what's going on with the Edward M. Lerner universe and telling us about your books. And before we leave, as a recap, I know you said you're working on one book, and but you have a release of the best of, or not the best of. What did you call your anthologies coming out?
The collection coming out is called The Best of Edward M. Lerner.
Okay, it is the best of. Okay, on May 20. That's May 23rd. So
and available for pre-order now.
Awesome. And so, other than that book, I know you're working on something else. Do you have a release date for the next book?
For the new novel, no, there's no release date yet. If people are curious about my novels, the best thing to do is go to my website, cleverly called edwardmlerner.com. I see you've already put it up helpfully.
We put it up 4 times. Yeah, holy cow.
Yeah, Amazon, LinkedIn, Facebook. I'm Edward M. Lerner on all of them.
That's funny because Dave and I don't know what each other's doing, and sometimes we do the same thing. That's normally when we do the same thing, and all of a sudden it comes up multiple times, but there's nothing wrong with that. So, and people looking for Edward M. Lerner books, where would they find them? Obviously Amazon, but
obviously Amazon. And if it's not on the shelf at your friendly neighborhood brick and mortar seller, just ask them to order. They'd much rather order a book for you than have you order it from Amazon.
Right.
BarnesandNoble.com.
And how about signed
I think
copies?
those are the main choices. What was that, Rich?
How about signed copies? If somebody wants to get a hold of a signed copy, how do they do that? Is there a way? Or they have to meet you with...
they have to meet me at a con.
Okay, all right. Awesome.
Yeah.
No, that's fine. So thank you for being with us today and sharing a little bit about your writing story, and that was very interesting.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're most
thanks for coming on, Edward.
Yeah, we're pleased to have you. So, Dave, before we leave, what's new in the David M. Kelly universe?
What's new for me is that I have just finished print formatting the second Logan's World book. So that's coming out in June June 6th.
So I will get my signed copy next time I see you
Mm,
then. If you care to give it to me.
maybe.
If you're not sold out, I will take one.
So
Well,
that's
June
really
6th
much
isn't far either.
Sorry?
June 6th isn't long either.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. It's not that long. It's kind of creeping up on me.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's always exciting.
Yeah.
And it, like Edward's book, mine is available for pre-order now as well. So
What was the title?
it's Quellention Dawn.
Thank you.
You have to spell that for us.
Kwelengsen.
Just like it sounds.
Yes, exactly. Yes. No, that's great. So,
What about you, Richard?
yeah, with me, I'm still plugging away at Windwalker. So it's getting near the end. And like Edward was saying earlier, that once everything starts coming together, it starts moving along a lot quicker. And I'm finally at that point. Like my books are like 600 pages long. So it takes quite a few pages to actually get the story to all come together because there's so many different story arcs. But it's starting to move along now. And hopefully we'll be wrapping it up shortly. But and I've been working on setting up a bunch of different cons, so Comic Cons and reading festivals, and I just got accepted into a local arts thing to read an excerpt from one of my stories in the next few weeks. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, that's always fun.
It is, yes, and I'm a lot better at it. I remember doing my first couple of readings, and I almost didn't read, but I'm getting, it's just something you have to do, and once you've done it a few times, all of a sudden. It's not that big of a deal. Anyway, next week I'm looking for Legends. We'll be welcoming back our first returning author, a speculative, that's a long word, speculative fiction and supernatural suspense author, Jessa Forrest. Jess is known for writing poetry and weird fiction. She's the author of The Slaughter Chronicle, a grimdark, Lovecraftian-esque contemporary fantasy about werewolves. She also writes speculative e-shorts. We'll have to ask what that means. Standalone bite-sized short stories for when you need to escape reality for an hour. So that sounds like the Bubble Bath. I think we had another author on here. They called them the Bubble Bath Chronicles, where you could just sit down in the bubble bath for an hour and read a story and you were done. So her short fiction and poetry has appeared in traditional print and online magazines. Sounds like it should be a great show. So again, Edward, thanks for coming on. For David and Kelly, myself, we hope everybody have an amazing week. And until we meet again, take good care.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.